The shepherd's solitude. The sun, a burnished disk in the immense African sky, cast a fiery hue across the veldt. David shielded his eyes, the wrinkles around them a testament to decades spent under its gaze. Ochre-colored dust, kicked up by his sandals, painted the air as he guided his flock toward the scant relief offered by a solitary acacia. The sheep, a churning mass of wool and insistent bleats, followed his gentle direction, their bells creating a jangling counterpoint to the savanna's awakening sounds. David's life unfolded in a familiar cycle of sunlight, gritty soil, animal cries, and the murmur of the breeze. Each sheep was known to him by the idiosyncrasies of its horns, its stubborn pace, the particular earth tones clinging to its fleece. He possessed an intimate knowledge of the terrain, its subtle dips and rises, the trails left by nocturnal creatures. The village, Alara, a cluster of mud-brick dwellings nestled against the savanna's edge, seemed to grow organically from the land. It was a small, tightly knit place where privacy was a luxury and the rhythm of existence was dictated by the seasons and the needs of the livestock. From his elevated position, David watched smoke curling from cooking fires, a beacon of community and warmth from which he often felt estranged. He wasn't a man of elaborate pronouncements. His language lived in the firm hand that aided a faltering lamb, the piercing whistle signaling danger to the flock, the still presence that soothed a nervous ewe. Yet, the villagers understood him. They spoke of his valor in hushed tones around the hearth. They recalled the year the river, swollen by monsoon rains, had become a raging torrent, sweeping young Samuel away. Without hesitation, David had plunged into the furious water, risking everything to rescue the boy, his quiet resolve a match for the river's wrath. Emerging, soaked and plastered with mud, he simply returned the child to his mother, uttering, "He's fine now." No boasting, no expectation of reward, only a calm reassurance. The sun continued its ascent, scorching the earth. The sheep, full and lethargic, clustered in the acacia's shadow. David rested against the gnarled trunk, his gaze sweeping the horizon. The savanna stretched before him, a boundless tapestry of golden grasses punctuated by scrub and thorny bushes. A distant shimmer betrayed the location of the watering hole, a vital resource for all creatures, predator and prey alike. He drew a piece of dried meat from his pouch, chewing methodically, his thoughts as expansive as the sky. He was content, perhaps, in his solitude. The sheep were his responsibility, their welfare his constant concern. He derived a certain solace from the predictable routine, the bond with the land, the natural cadence of life. Yet, sometimes, particularly as the sun began its descent, painting the sky with vibrant strokes of crimson and gold, a profound loneliness would descend, a yearning for something beyond the bleating of sheep. He yearned for the sound of merriment, the comfort of conversation, the sensation of another's touch. He missed his wife. He recalled her visage, her sparkling eyes, the way her laughter would banish the darkness. Mara, now gone, a victim of a fever that had swept through the village like a destructive brush fire. Her absence was a persistent ache, a void that no amount of isolation could remedy. A subtle movement in the distance caught his attention. Not the languid gait of a grazing antelope, nor the circling flight of a raptor. This was different, a furtive, almost desperate movement near the water's edge. He squinted, trying to discern the shape. It was small, close to the ground, and appeared to be struggling. Curiosity, an old acquaintance, began to stir. He stood, leaving the sheep to their peaceful rest. He advanced slowly, carefully, his senses on high alert, his hand instinctively reaching for the simple spear he carried. The savanna was a realm of both magnificent beauty and lurking peril, and he knew better than to underestimate either. As he approached, the shape solidified. It was a cub, a lion cub, barely a few months old. It lay on its side, its breathing ragged, its eyes clouded with pain. A thorn, long and cruel, was lodged deeply in its paw. David hesitated. Lions were apex predators, formidable and unpredictable. He had witnessed their hunts, heard their roars echoing across the plains. But this was merely a cub, wounded and defenseless. And something in its suffering echoed the pain in his own heart, the memory of vulnerability and loss. He knew what he should do. He should abandon it, allow nature to run its course. But he couldn't. He couldn't forsake a creature in need, not even a lion. He was David, the shepherd of Alara, and compassion was as intrinsic to his being as the sun and the dust. He drew nearer. The cub whimpered, but made no attempt to flee. A cry in the wilderness. The sun blazed upon the tawny expanse, warping the air into shimmering waves. Sweat trickled down David's forehead, the rough-spun tunic chafing his skin as he wiped it away. His sheep, normally flighty, sprawled listlessly in the skimpy shade of scattered thorn bushes, their fleeces radiating trapped heat. Even the vultures spiraling overhead seemed sluggish, their shadows inching slowly across the baked land. He longed for Mara's presence. The midday hush, usually a solace, now bore down on him, magnifying the hollowness within. Mara would have been at her loom, her deft fingers coaxing vibrant patterns from the spring's shearing. He could almost hear the rhythmic clack, a comforting beat against the sheep's muted calls. Now, only the drone of flies and the dry whisper of wind through brittle grasses filled the silence. Years of vigilance had etched in him a habit. He scanned the horizon for predators. The land stretched, an unforgiving vista of ochre and gold broken by the occasional verdant baobab. The flood flashed in his mind, the boy's terrified face as the waters rose. He banished the memory, anchoring himself to the present, to his responsibility for the flock's safety. A faint sound, barely audible, drifted on the heated breeze. A whimper, reedy and thin, like a fledgling's cry. He stilled, listening intently, his hand instinctively gripping the knobkerrie at his side. The sheep shifted, their ears flicking, sensing his disquiet. He moved cautiously, his senses heightened, his gaze searching the surroundings. The whimper came again, louder now, tinged with desperation. It seemed to emanate from the ancient acacia grove, a knot of gnarled trees marking the edge of his pasture. He hesitated. The grove was known to shelter snakes, and sometimes a lone leopard sought refuge there in the heat of the day. But that sound, it plucked at something deep within, a primal urge to shield the defenseless. Entrusting the flock to the care of his oldest ram, he headed towards the grove, his steps measured and wary. The air grew close as he entered the acacia's shadow, the temperature dropping noticeably. The ground crunched beneath his feet, a carpet of fallen branches and desiccated leaves. The whimpers sounded again, clearer now, undeniably distress. He followed the sound, pushing through a thicket of thorny bushes. Then he saw it. A colossal acacia, its trunk as thick as a man, had toppled, its branches entangled in the undergrowth. Trapped beneath, wedged between the massive trunk and the earth, was a lion cub. It was tiny, scarcely larger than a house cat, its fur the color of sun-baked sand, its eyes wide with fright. One of its hind legs was pinned, immobile. The cub whimpered again, a heartbreaking sound that pierced the stillness. David approached gingerly, his voice a low, soothing murmur. "Hush, little one," he whispered. "I'm here. I'll help." The cub tensed, its small frame trembling. It struggled to free its leg, but the tree held firm. He noticed the raw, exposed flesh where the rough bark had torn its skin. Circling the tree, he assessed the situation. The trunk was too heavy to budge alone. He needed leverage. His eyes darted across the ground, seeking a sturdy branch or a rock to serve as a fulcrum. Time was precious. The cub's whimpers faded, and the sun beat down relentlessly. He knew that without intervention, the cub would succumb to injury and heat stroke. And then there was the pride itself. Where was the mother? Was she watching hidden nearby? He found a broad, flat stone near the tree's base. Imperfect, but the best available. He positioned the stone carefully, then began to search for a robust branch. He located one, thick and unyielding, partially buried in the dust. It was weighty, but he managed to drag it into position, He jammed one end of the branch under the fallen trunk, using the rock as a pivot. Drawing a deep breath, he leaned all his weight onto the other end of the branch. The wood groaned and protested. For an instant, nothing. Then, slowly, excruciatingly, the trunk began to rise. Only a sliver, but enough. The cub yelped, and David saw its leg was free. He held the branch steady, his muscles screaming. "Go," he urged, his voice tight with effort. "Get out of here." No urging was needed. It scrambled from beneath the tree, its injured leg trailing. For a moment, it fixed David with a gaze filled with mingled fear and gratitude. Then, with a final whimper, it limped into the dense undergrowth, vanishing into the shadows. David released the branch, the trunk crashing back to the ground with a dull thud. He stood there, gasping, his body shaking with exhaustion. He watched the space where the cub had disappeared, listening for any sound of its return. The grove seemed to hold its breath, the air heavy with foreboding. He knew he ought to leave, return to his flock before the mother returned. Yet, he couldn't dispel the feeling of being watched. Turning slowly, he scanned the surrounding trees. Then he saw them, two pairs of eyes, burning like embers in the dimness. Lionesses, the weight of compassion. The air hung thick and still, heavy with the scent of sun-baked earth and the underlying musk of the lionesses. David's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drum against the silence that had fallen. He risked a glance at the adult lions. Their amber eyes, narrowed and unwavering, held him captive. They hadn't attacked. Not yet. But the trapped cub, its whimpers had faded to shallow, ragged breaths. David knew he couldn't just stand there, paralyzed by fear. He had to try. He shifted his weight, the rough wool of his tunic scratching against his skin. The tree, a gnarled acacia ripped from its roots by some long-ago storm, lay pinning the cub's hind legs. It wasn't a monstrous trunk, but its weight, combined with the awkward angle, seemed insurmountable. David took another breath, slower this time, forcing himself to focus. He needed a plan, a way to leverage his strength. He scanned the ground, finding a few fist-sized stones. Not ideal, but better than nothing. He wedged them beneath the edge of the fallen tree, creating a tiny fulcrum. He approached the tree, his muscles already protesting. The rough bark scraped against his palms as he gripped the trunk. The air vibrated with the low growls emanating from the lionesses, a constant reminder of the precariousness of his situation. He ignored them, channeling every ounce of his focus into the task at hand. "Easy," he muttered, his voice barely a whisper. "Easy now." He bent his knees, keeping his back straight, and began to push. The tree didn't budge. He strained harder, his muscles screaming in protest. The stones shifted slightly, digging into the earth. Still nothing. Sweat beaded on his forehead, stinging his eyes. He blinked it away, his vision blurring for a moment. He could feel the heat radiating from the lionesses, their presence a tangible force pressing down on him. He imagined their claws, their teeth. He pushed the image away. He couldn't afford to falter. He adjusted his grip, finding a slightly better purchase on the rough bark. He inhaled deeply, drawing strength from the depths of his lungs. He focused on the image of the cub, trapped and helpless. That image fueled him. With a grunt, he pushed again, harder this time. His muscles burned, his vision swam. He felt something give, a slight shift in the weight. He pushed harder, gritting his teeth against the pain. The stones groaned under the pressure, but held. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, the tree began to lift. A sliver of space appeared between the trunk and the ground, enough to see the cub's trembling legs. David held his breath, his body shaking with exertion. He couldn't hold it for long. He needed to lift it higher, just a little bit more. He poured every last ounce of his strength into the effort, his muscles screaming in defiance. With a final, desperate surge, he managed to lift the tree high enough for the cub to scramble free. He collapsed back onto his heels, gasping for air, the weight of the tree crashing back to the earth with a dull thud. His arms trembled, his legs felt like jelly. He was spent, utterly and completely exhausted. The cub lay panting on the ground, its fur matted with dirt and blood. Its hind legs were twisted at an unnatural angle, and it whimpered softly. But it was free. David watched as the cub struggled to its feet, its movements clumsy and uncertain. It took a few tentative steps, then collapsed again, its whimpers growing louder. He risked another glance at the lionesses. They hadn't moved. They were still watching him, their eyes narrowed, their expressions unreadable. He wondered what they would do now. Would they attack him for interfering? Or would they— The thought trailed off as one of the lionesses took a step forward. Leo's rescue. Leo, small and trembling, nudged David's hand with his wet nose. It wasn't a forceful shove, but a gentle, tentative touch, as if seeking reassurance. The cub's amber eyes, still clouded with fear, held a glimmer of something else— gratitude. David felt a surge of warmth flood his chest, eclipsing the lingering ache in his muscles. He stroked the soft fur behind Leo's ears, feeling the cub relax slightly under his touch. A low, rumbling purr vibrated in Leo's small body, a sound so incongruous with the cub's earlier terror. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, the energy drained from the cub. Leo collapsed against David's leg, his breathing shallow and rapid. The lionesses remained statues, their golden eyes unwavering, but the tension had eased, replaced by a watchful calm. David knew he couldn't stay here. Leo needed care, and the open savanna offered little protection from predators, even for a lion cub. He gently scooped Leo into his arms, careful of his injured leg. The cub was surprisingly light, his ribs too prominent beneath his fur. "I'm going to take you somewhere safe, little one," David whispered, his voice hoarse. He rose slowly, testing his strain back. Each movement sent a jolt of pain through him, but the thought of Leo spurred him onward. He expected some resistance from the lionesses, a warning growl or a defensive stance, but they simply watched as he turned and began the trek back towards his hut. It was a silent escort, a procession of golden eyes tracking his every step. The journey felt longer than it was. The setting sun cast long, distorted shadows that danced around them, making the savanna seem both beautiful and menacing. Leo remained nestled in David's arms, his body limp, his breath a faint whisper against David's neck. David worried he was losing him. His hut, a small, mud-brick structure with a thatched roof, came into view as dusk began to paint the sky in hues of orange and purple. He pushed open the roughly hewn wooden door and stepped inside, the familiar scent of dried herbs and wood smoke filling his nostrils. He laid Leo gently on a woven mat near the small fire pit. The hut was sparsely furnished, a simple bed made of woven reeds, a small wooden table, and a few clay pots. It was a humble dwelling, but it was home, and now it was Leo's home too. David fetched a clay bowl and poured in some fresh goat milk, a staple of his diet. He dipped a clean piece of cloth into the milk and gently dabbed at the dirt and dried, blood-matting Leo's fur around the wound on his leg. The cub flinched but didn't cry out. The wound was deep, a jagged tear in his flesh, but it didn't appear infected. He cleaned the wound as best he could, then offered the soaked cloth to Leo. The cub, weak but instinctively hungry, began to suckle at the cloth, his small body trembling. David watched, a mixture of hope and concern swirling within him. As Leo drank, David examined the rest of the cub's body. He was thin, too thin for a cub his age. He ran a hand along Leo's spine, feeling the sharp ridges of his vertebrae. He would need to feed him regularly, build up his strength. Once Leo had finished drinking, he looked up at David, his amber eyes clearer now, filled with a fragile trust. He licked David's hand, a rough, sandpapery touch that sent a shiver down David's spine. David smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "You're going to be all right, little one," he whispered. "I'm going to take care of you." He decided then and there that the cub would be called Leo, a name that felt right, a name that spoke of strength and resilience. He settled down beside Leo, stoking the fire to keep the hut warm. The night sounds of the savanna began to fill the air. The chirping of crickets, the distant howl of a hyena, the rustling of leaves in the wind. He knew the lionesses were still out there, watching. He could feel their presence, a silent promise, or perhaps a silent threat. He wasn't sure which. But for now, all that mattered was Leo. He closed his eyes, the exhaustion finally catching up with him, and drifted off to sleep, the soft purr of the lion cub a comforting lullaby in the darkness. A bond forged. The first few days were touch and go. Leo whimpered often, his small body trembling despite the rough blanket David had fashioned for him. David tended to the cub with a quiet devotion, cleaning the wound on his flank twice a day with water warmed over the small fire. He mixed goat's milk with crushed berries, coaxing the mixture down Leo's throat with a makeshift spoon carved from a smooth stone. Sleep came in short bursts, punctuated by Leo's cries or the rustle of the wind through the thatch of the hut. Slowly, however, Leo began to heal. The fever broke, and a spark of life returned to his golden eyes. He started to eat with more enthusiasm, his tiny teeth nipping playfully at David's fingers. One morning, David awoke to find Leo attempting to stand, his legs wobbly but determined. He collapsed with a soft thump, letting out a frustrated squeak. David chuckled, gently helping him back to his feet. "Easy there, little one," he murmured, stroking Leo's mane, which was starting to grow into a soft, tawny fluff. "You'll be running like the wind soon enough." And he was right. Within a week, Leo was padding around the hut with confidence, batting at dust motes dancing in the sunlight, and pouncing on David's worn sandals. The hut, once a place of quiet solitude, was now filled with the joyful sounds of Leo's playful growls and the soft thud of his paws on the earthen floor. Their days fell into a comfortable rhythm. David would rise with the sun, milking his goats and tending to his small garden. Leo would follow him everywhere, a miniature shadow trotting at his heels. After breakfast, they would venture out onto the savannah. David would graze his goats, keeping a watchful eye on the horizon, while Leo explored the tall grasses, chasing butterflies and wrestling with fallen branches. David taught Leo the ways of the savannah, pointing out the different birds that soared overhead, the tracks of animals in the dust, and the rustling sounds that betrayed the presence of hidden creatures. He showed him how to drink from the clear stream that snaked through the valley and how to find the shadiest spots to rest during the hottest part of the day. Leo, in turn, brought a sense of joy and purpose back into David's life that he thought he had lost forever. He found himself laughing again, something he hadn't done in years. The cub's boundless energy and unwavering affection chipped away at the wall of grief that had surrounded his heart, allowing a flicker of hope to ignite within him. One afternoon, as they rested beneath the shade of a large acacia tree, David watched Leo stalking a grasshopper with intense focus. The cub's muscles were coiled, his eyes narrowed, and his tail twitched with anticipation. Suddenly, he pounced, his small body launching through the air. He missed, of course, and tumbled head over heels into the grass. David chuckled, and Leo looked up, his expression sheepish. He padded over to David and nuzzled against his leg, purring contentedly. David scratched him behind the ears, feeling a surge of affection for the little lion. "You'll get him next time, Leo," he said softly. "You're a natural hunter." He knew, of course, that Leo would eventually have to return to his own kind. He couldn't keep a lion cub forever. But for now, he would cherish these moments, these days of laughter and companionship, these precious weeks that were forging a bond between a man and a lion, a bond that transcended species and circumstance. The thought of Leo leaving brought a pang of sadness, but he pushed it aside. He would focus on the present, on the joy that Leo brought into his life, and trust that whatever the future held, they would face it together as friends. The Pride Shadow. The sinking sun burnished the savannah with shades of ochre and gold. A laugh escaped David as he watched Leo stalk a patch of reeds, his boundless exuberance a constant delight. Though his paws were still developing, his miniature roar hinted at the sovereign he was destined to become. David tossed the worn leather ball he'd fashioned for the cub, and Leo exploded after it, a tiny sunbeam against the tapestry of earth tones. "Fetch, Leo," David called, his voice infused with a mirth he hadn't known in years. He leaned against the acacia, its gnarled bark a familiar comfort against his spine, a silent witness to their shared solace. Watching Leo, a wave of contentment washed over him. The cub was more than a rescue. He was the rekindled flame of David's spirit. The usual chorus of buzzing insects and distant bird calls faded into an unnerving hush. Leo, mid-leap, stilled, his ears pivoting, his playful air replaced by sharp awareness. Sensing the shift, David straightened, his hand finding the familiar curve of a shepherd's crook. A guttural growl, a tremor that shook the very ground beneath them, shattered the tranquility. It was a sound of raw power, of primal hunger, a promise of imminent danger. Leo whimpered, a soft, fearful sound that wrung David's heart. He gathered the cub close, stroking the velvety fur, offering reassurance against the encroaching dread. The growl resonated again, closer now, and David's eyes scanned the tall grasses that formed the perimeter of their sanctuary. The elongated shadows cast by the dying sun played tricks on the eye, but he knew what lurked there. The grasses swayed in a swift, rhythmic dance, and then they emerged. Not a solitary hunter, nor a pair, but an entire pride of lions. Lionesses, their eyes gleaming with predatory fire, their muscles flowing beneath coats of tawny gold. Adolescent males, their nascent manes proclaiming their coming dominance. And leading them, a magnificent king, his dark mane a regal diadem, his gaze radiating both ancient wisdom and untamed ferocity. They moved with fluid grace, a silent cascade of muscle and bone, their focus unwavering. No imidita sold, no aggressive. They simply stood as a living barricade of golden fur and lethal fangs, their presence a tangible menace. Tension crackled in the air, the silence punctuated only by the occasional rumble and the soft patting of their paws on the parched earth. David held his ground, his pulse a frantic drum against his ribs, his grip on Leo firm and protective. He knew any hint of fear would be an invitation to attack. He met the gaze of the alpha, locking eyes with the sovereign of this wild domain. He attempted to exude calm, a facade of confidence, hoping the lions might perceive him as no threat. Escape was an impossible dream. He was outmatched, outnumbered. His only recourse was to stand firm, to demonstrate unwavering resolve, to safeguard Leo at all costs. The lead lion advanced, his massive head held high, his eyes never straying from David's. The air thickened with the heavy scent of musk and latent power. David steeled himself, ready to defend Leo, prepared to confront whatever fate had in store. Then, one of the lionesses, younger than the others, detached from the group, her gaze not on David, but on the cub in his arms. She approached cautiously, her movements measured, inquisitive. She halted a few feet away, her attention riveted on Leo. A soft, almost mournful sound escaped her, a low vibration that seemed to resonate deep within her core. Then, to David's utter surprise, she lowered her head, gently nudging Leo's outstretched paw. An offering? A recognition? David couldn't decipher the meaning. He only knew that in that instant, the oppressive tension seemed to ease, the palpable threat receding, replaced by a delicate, uncertain truce. But what did it signify? What did the pride seek from Leo? From him? Facing Callie. The atmosphere pressed down, a tangible force thrumming with untamed power that resonated within David. A stark certainty gripped him. These were Leo's kin. This wasn't mere chance. It was a convergence, a confrontation long in the making. The realization hit him hard, driving the air from his lungs and replacing it with a glacial dread. His hand tightened on the rough-hewn spear, the wood now slick with nervous sweat. The lionesses shifted, their synchronized movements a silent testament to their collective strength. At the rear, the pride male remained a towering figure, his amber eyes boring into David, calculating, assessing. Yet, it was the lioness in the vanguard who captivated. She possessed a regal bearing that masked the potent force coiled beneath her golden hide. A darker mane framed a face imbued with wisdom, keen intelligence, and an unwavering focus. She was a leader undoubtedly. Instinct whispered her name, Callie. Callie, a breath on the wind, carrying the weight of the wild. He recalled the young lioness, the one who had shown Leo such gentle curiosity. Now, facing the head of the pride, he understood. That curiosity hadn't been arbitrary. It mirrored Callie's own feelings, her own assessment. Callie's amber gaze locked onto David, an almost physical strike. He felt pinned by her eyes, dissected, his very being laid bare. No overt aggression marked her stance, no snarl or growl, yet the sheer intensity of her focus eclipsed any outward threat. Authority radiated from her, quiet but absolute. She advanced, each footfall deliberate, measured. The other lionesses yielded before her, their respect a palpable thing. A soft whimper escaped Leo as he huddled closer to David's leg. Crouching lower, David shielded the cub, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. The lion's scent overwhelmed him, a musky, earthy aroma that flooded his senses and made his head swim. He heard their breathing, the low rumbles within their chests, the subtle shifts of weight. The silence stretched, almost unbearable, broken only by the frantic thud of his own pulse. Callie halted mere feet away, her eyes never wavering. He saw the intricate map of her whiskers, the tiny scars etched upon her muzzle, chronicles of battles waged and won. The untamed essence of the wild filled her breath, carrying the scent of raw meat and raw power. He met her stare, refusing to yield, refusing to betray fear, though every instinct screamed for flight. He stood firm, a frail mortal defying the apex predator, a guardian shielding the cub he'd vowed to protect. The wind rose, swirling dust devils that danced around them, lashing strands of hair across David's face. The sun blazed, turning the savannah into a shimmering expanse. Tension crackled in the air, the unspoken question hanging between them. What now? David adjusted his grip on the spear, knuckles bone-white. A futile defense against such force, yet all he possessed. He would fight. He would protect Leo, even unto death. A promise made, a promise kept. Callie inclined her head slightly, her expression an enigma. Then, her gaze softened as it fell upon Leo, peeking out from behind David's legs. A momentary flicker, tenderness, recognition, softened her features. Then it vanished, her gaze hardening, challenging. The weight of her stare was almost crushing. He braced, anticipating the inevitable. The roar, the strike, the end. But it didn't come. Instead, Callie emitted a low, guttural rumble, a sound that resonated deep within David's chest. Not a growl, not exactly, but something else. An inquiry, perhaps. A question whispered in the tongue of the wild. He couldn't decipher its meaning. He only knew that the fate of Leo, and possibly his own, hung precariously. Breath suspended, he waited for her next move. The savannah held its breath alongside him. An unexpected alliance. The deep, resonant vibration emanating from Callie was no aggressive growl, but something more profound, a near purr imbued with ancient wisdom. Her amber gaze, unwavering on David, softened imperceptibly, not with affection, perhaps, but with dawning recognition or even gratitude. Absurd as the notion seemed, it saturated the air, as potent as sun-baked earth and feline musk. She dipped her majestic head, nudging Leo with maternal tenderness. Emboldened by her action and David's continued presence, the cub playfully butted against her mane. Callie's eyes flicked back, a silent dialogue passing between them, its meaning just beyond his grasp. Was this a test of character? An unspoken negotiation? Slowly, deliberately, she shifted aside. The unspoken signal. David's heart hammered, a frantic tattoo against the stillness. He steeled himself, anticipating a charge. Yet it never came. Instead, the other lions began to stir. Not toward him, but around. A slender lioness, scarcely beyond cubhood, brushed his leg, a timid, fleeting caress. Then a scarred male nudged his shoulder. He flinched, but the contact was gentle, a low rumble echoing Callie's resonating deep within him. Unbelievable. They were expressing thanks. Each lion, in their unique manner, offered silent acknowledgement, a brush of fur, a nudge from an immense head. The once oppressive atmosphere now hummed with palpable acceptance, even respect. David stood transfixed, Leo secure at his feet, observing the display with innocent awe. The pride circled, a silent, tawny current, their individual sense coalescing into an overwhelming wave of raw power. He felt their heat, their exhalations against his skin, the subtle flex of their powerful musculature. Encompassed, yet untouched, Callie observed him, her gaze unwavering. Once the last had paid their respects, she turned, a flick of her tail the only command, and moved towards the trees. The others followed, leaving David and Leo alone in the clearing's heart. He remained frozen, scarcely daring to breathe, fearful of shattering the delicate peace. Had he imagined it all? Some intricate deception? Then Callie reappeared, dragging something behind her. A freshly slain gazelle, dropped at David's feet, a pristine, unbroken offering. The metallic scent of blood filled the air, a vivid reminder of the primal forces at play. A peace offering, an incredible, shocking display of gratitude. David stared at the kill, then back at Callie. Her expression remained inscrutable, a mask of feline detachment. Yet, within her eyes, he glimpsed something more, a spark of nascent understanding. He swallowed hard, his mouth suddenly parched. He understood the implications. It was more than Leo's survival. It spoke of the future, of the fragile equilibrium between humankind and beast, of the civilized and the untamed. He knelt, ignoring the protests of his aging joints, and reached out, his hand trembling slightly. He didn't touch the gazelle. Instead, he fixed his gaze on Callie, meeting her intense stare. "Thank you," he rasped, his voice rough. She offered no sound, only held his gaze a moment longer, before turning to rejoin the pride, melting into the shadows of the acacias. Silence descended once more, pierced only by the chirping of insects and a distant jackal's cry. David remained kneeling, the gazelle before him, Leo nudging his leg. The sun scorched his back, yet a chill snaked through him. He had been spared. He had been accepted. But he knew, with a certainty that settled in his very core, that this was only the first step. This improbable alliance, so fragile, represented a gamble on a precarious future. And the stakes were higher than he could possibly have comprehended. The legend of the lion shepherd. The dawn after the gift of the kill bled across the horizon in strokes of rose and apricot. David left his humble dwelling, a persistent unease clenching his gut despite the previous day's momentous happenings. He braced himself for suspicious glances, hushed conversations, perhaps even palpable fear from his fellow villagers. Instead, he encountered reverence. They kept their distance, a space dictated by generations of caution, but their gazes shone with newfound admiration, not the terrified flicker he knew so well. Old Man Hemlock, usually quick to complain about straying livestock, simply offered a curt nod, his deeply lined face a canvas of indecipherable thought. Soon, the reason became evident. The lions hadn't simply departed after their offering. They were guarding the village limits. Callie, regal and imposing, stood sentry atop the highest crag overlooking their home, her amber eyes sweeping the landscape. The rest of the pride, a shifting mosaic of tawny muscle, patrolled the valley's edge. They were protectors. Word surged through neighboring settlements. Murmurs escalated into tales, and tales blossomed into myth. David, the shepherd who had befriended a lion, who walked unharmed amongst the pride, became a figure of folklore. Farmers reported fewer raids on their flocks. Travelers told stories of lions deterring would-be robbers. A palpable security, an invisible bulwark born of respect and trepidation, settled over the valley. Leo, predictably, reveled in the adulation. He pranced through the village like a diminutive monarch holding court, his playful swats now interpreted as kindly blessings. David smiled, watching him interact with the children, their fears slowly dissolving, replaced by tentative laughter and outstretched fingers. He made it a point to visit the pride regularly, Leo scampering ahead, a furry emissary. Callie would greet them with a deep purr, a sound that once chilled David to the bone, but now felt strangely welcoming. He'd bring fresh water, sometimes a token offering of meat, not as appeasement, but as a symbol of enduring fellowship. He'd sit beside them, sometimes for hours, simply observing the intricate tapestry of the pride's interactions, their subtle communications, their steadfast loyalty. One evening, as the sun sank, setting the firmament ablaze with color, Callie approached. She nudged his hand with her massive head, a gesture that still felt surreal, then turned, leading him toward a secluded part of their domain. They halted before a small, secluded spring, its water pristine and frigid. Callie lowered her head and drank, then gazed at David, an unspoken invitation in her eyes. He knelt and drank deeply, the water invigorating, a symbol of their shared trust, a bond forged in the heart of the wilderness. From afar, the villagers observed these encounters and began to grasp the truth. They perceived not a threat, but an alliance. They saw not a savage beast, but a guardian. They saw in David not merely a shepherd, but a bridge between two disparate realms. Old Man Hemlock, his grumbling silenced, started calling him Lionheart. The moniker resonated. Children composed ballads about the valiant shepherd who befriended the lions. Mothers recounted tales of his bravery, incorporating his narrative into their children's bedtime routines. David, the reserved, sorrowful shepherd, had ascended to the status of legend. Yet, the legend came with a burden. He understood the peace was precarious, contingent on his actions, the pride's disposition, the shifting tides of fate. He couldn't control everything. He could only continue to conduct himself with reverence, with empathy, with unwavering hope that the delicate equilibrium would hold. Too soon, a band of hunters descended upon the valley, their eyes gleaming with avarice, their weapons glinting cruelly in the sunlight. They had heard the accounts, the myths, and they perceived not a miracle, but a resource to exploit. They plotted to slay the lions, to claim the valley for themselves, to capitalize on the newfound tranquility for their own selfish ends. David realized, with icy dread, that the fragile accord he had painstakingly fostered was about to face its ultimate trial. The saga of the lion shepherd was about to be tempered in flames.